So I've given my painting a bit of a dry with a heat tool, and you can probably see, if I bring this up close to the camera, you get these interesting effects where we've worked wet on dry, but we've actually mixed the colours wet in wet because we've mixed more than one shade together. So I'm now going to come in with my pen and I'm going to add some of this detail to these seed heads. So I'm going to want to go up to my edges, and you can work in quite a sketchy way. It doesn't have to be neat and tidy. It almost adds a bit of interest and diversity if you make it kind of sketchy, really. So I'm just adding some sort of groove details. Adding some texture at the top as well. I'm using almost like a sort of dotted line on this side, and more of a solid line on the left. So just trace the outline of where your colour meets the white paper. And just go down in one smooth line. And on this side, use that kind of lighter pressure and almost slightly dotted line. If you've got one of these pen sets, then the other way you can do this is to use a thicker pen on the left and then a thinner pen on the right, and then that will give you the same kind of impression. You can almost use a dotted line here, add a little bit of texture detail at the top. You can even make this line slightly thicker here if we want to. And the same over here, quite scribbly, thick line on the left, and adding those ridges, and coming down on the stem, just looking for that line where the watercolour meets the page. And then on this side, working really thin, almost dotted lines and sort of scribbly, and pressure much less. So we can create quite a thin line there. The other thing we might want to do on these stems is to just give a little bit of an impression of being some texture. And I'm just doing that, it's almost like when we do tree trunks, and almost create those short lines which kind of converge in a random way, like so. Just to give an impression that there is some texture there. So be quite experimental with your lines, because we don't need this to look overly realistic. So if there's something you feel drawn to do, have a play, have a go. We're looking for something sort of lively and experimental. And hopefully it doesn't feel too intimidating using ink, because we've already laid colour down, and we've also already put pencil guidelines in. So if you're really worried about this stage, then at least hopefully having those pencil guidelines at the beginning will make you feel a wee bit more confident. I find it quite relaxing doing this. The thing to do is just let go. If it makes you feel a bit uptight or a bit anxious, then just let go and see what comes. It's no good if you're feeling tense when you're trying to create something. So, you know, just relax and breathe. Hopefully you're finding it fun like I am, and not worried about getting it right or getting it wrong or any of that stuff. So you can see that just adding this pen starts to make those seed heads come alive now, because we're building in contrast. So whereas prior to this we only had the watercolour and the white paper, now when we look at our composition it's looking more striking because it has another layer which is dark values. So we're building that contrast. Do my little scribbly crown. Add a bit of detail. Put my lines at the side. And as I always say, in nature nothing is kind of straight and uniform. So have fun, just make it loose. Come down very gently on that right hand side. And then add that texture in here on our stem. So you can see where the colours have mixed on the stem. When you add the ink work over the top, it actually looks quite cool. You don't notice any of the transitions quite so much. So you should be getting into a flow with this now. Once you get to this side of the paper, it should all be downhill. Scribbly crown. Delicate outline on the right. And then adding our ridges and marks. Don't forget to follow the curve of the shape of the seed head as well with those. And then sit back and have a little look and see if you want to add any more lines anywhere. Anything looks a bit too underdrawn. So that now looks quite different, I think. So for the next part, what I've done here is I've mixed the turquoise that I had and I've moved it to the well in the middle here with some of the green, and it's made this kind of quite dark, jadey kind of a green colour. Now, remembering that watercolour dries lighter than it would first appear, we want to make sure that it's fairly dark. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a stiff bristle brush, push it into there, and I'm just going to dab like this. Try not to get it into the red seed heads, try and keep it to the bottom if you can. You might need to go back and add a wee bit more water. There's all kinds of ways you can do this background, but I thought today we'd just do a simple one, just in case we've got people who haven't used watercolour before. And then clean that colour off the brush, give it a bit of a wipe, and then use your green, which will come in lighter. give your brush a wash, and then at the top we'll do a bit of yellow. Don't go too mad with the splatters, otherwise it's going to look a bit like a Dalmatian. Can add some at the bottom. Now you will find this will mix on the page, so if you splat your yellow into a green area, you might end up with something a wee bit mottly, but I wouldn't worry too much. If you do end up with something like that, you find a dry cloth, just dab it with a dry cloth, and then what we can always do is come in with a small brush and almost fake the drips. Basically we're just tidying them up like so. There we go. And you can also use a small brush to just make some smaller splatters like this. So we've got ones of different sizes. And really it's up to you. I think it's better to have darker colours at the bottom because the darker colours will ground the composition. So it just looks better to the eye if we have darker at the bottom and lighter at the top. Just what our eye is used to seeing, to be fair. Try a few of these orangey ones at the top. Not too many of those, I think. Maybe some of this. Just going to get a kind of a range of sizes, really. So we don't just end up with large splats or tiny splats. You can also do drips as well, so make your brush really wet and just hold it perpendicular to the paper and just tap the end. And give you a little bit more control over it as well, particularly if you want to do a few of the larger splats in a more controlled way. Just hold it about ½ an inch from your paper. Eventually it will drop. You might have to wait a while. You can just go like this as well. That's another way to get those controlled splashes. And quite a wet brush. There we go. So I think that looks quite nice. And if you want to tidy up your seed heads as well, if you want to add a little bit more of your colour, you can. If you fancy. Just touching them up a little bit, or you might have a bit here like I do where there's green that's gone in. So just give it a little bit of a... It's quite nice actually, because this has allowed me to add a wee bit of shadow there. So yeah, you can always do that. So there are advantages to picking up darker areas of colour from your page. You can always just flick that up over the pen lines. Just adds a little bit of shadow to those. Not that we're concerned about shadow, but it just adds a little dynamic area. It's gone outside of my line, so let's just correct that with a paintbrush. So just take a little sort of step back from the composition and see how you feel about it. Hopefully you haven't oversplatted. Do need to be controlled with the splats. It's kind of a semi-controlled thing because it's not really a controlled procedure, but you need to kind of just control it slightly so that it's not taking over your painting. There we go. So you can either leave it there or you can allow that to dry And then what I might do is I might just drip some yellow down from the top when that's dry and come back to it. But I'm going to leave this to air dry now, because you do get a slightly different effect. If you dry with a heat gun, you tend to end up getting a lot more cauliflowers and things in your work. So there we go. If you don't like any of your little splatters, just either mop them up or go over them. But what you're aiming for is a kind of a balance, really, within the composition. So there you go. So you can either leave it at this stage, or I will come back later and then just show you how to drip down if you want to add something else in.